Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today and I hope you enjoyed these stories. Make sure you check out my Patreon if you want to support the channel or want early access to my stories, and make sure that you check out my podcast in the description below. I have a quick message before the stories start, so for today I'd like to share this. As someone who's overcome anxiety before, I can remember that there used to be times when I'd have bad days with the anxiety and it would really ruin everything for me. I would come back and feel pretty down and just not feel good about anything really, and not really feel like there was any way for it to improve, and I used to genuinely think that was just how I was and that was normal. Now it's important to understand that you can get therapy and there is help out there to help you overcome it, and honestly you can completely turn things around. I remember that there was days when I literally couldn't bear getting a haircut, but now I can speak at big conferences full of strangers and I'm literally the most confident person in the room. It wasn't easy to overcome and it took a lot of effort and there was lots of ups and downs, but I knew to ride out the bad times and try not to focus on it too much, and also appreciate the good times and take little steps and understand that for me getting better wasn't a linear thing. It did have ups and downs and kind of like phases, but you have to keep going and that's the most important thing, and make sure that you do seek help. So if anybody else out there is struggling with any mental health issue, whether it's anxiety or whatever, I promise it does get better and there is help out there and there are other people who feel the way you do and completely understand. That was another thing that I used to struggle with, was I thought nobody else felt the way I did, but trust me, there are other people just like you out there, so never feel alone in it. And I believe in you and you can overcome it and anything in front of you. We'll get through this all together and we're all here to support each other. So just keep going. I promise it will get better. So that's my message for today. So I hope you all enjoyed these stories and I'll speak to you all soon, and have a good week. The weirdest thing that ever happened to me was while I was doing some ranger training with one of the really senior rangers. We were walking along and he said, "What did you say?" I looked at him confused and said nothing. Then he looks at me terrified. It only lasts for a few seconds, but he snaps out of it again. We walk a little bit further down and suddenly I hear my name being called by the ranger and I say, "What's up?" He looks at me and says nothing, and we continue on. Then 10 minutes later I hear my name called out again. I report it to the ranger and he doesn't say anything but quickly turns around and gestures that I should follow him. We eventually get back to the station and he tells me that he was sure that he could hear me calling off in the distance. I then tell him that I heard him constantly calling me, and he looks at me confused but like he's experienced it before and says, "Don't worry too much if you get this. There's things out here we don't understand." It never happened since, but it really freaks me out. I'm someone who always did night security, and I never really enjoyed it, so I eventually changed my careers and become a forest ranger. Now this is a job that I absolutely loved. I remember on one shift, I got a report that I had to go and check out an area because people were littering, and I got there and of course there was nothing. The wind and stuff would make things blow away everywhere and it could be really difficult to track down even litter, let alone the litter bugs. Now that's when I noticed something strange. There's a deer up ahead. I say deer, but then I realised that it was attached to a person. I don't know how to describe it, but it's almost like a deer standing up with the front part of a human. Now I was absolutely awestruck by this. I've never seen anything like it. It was accompanied with a strange clicking sound and the sounds of somebody calling out for help. Now, I was very brave in this moment and I completely bolted out of there. Much of my retreat is a complete blur, but I eventually made it back to the station and I explained what had happened. I was pretty concerned, and some of the other rangers then called me in and decided to tell me what this is. Apparently they're called skinwalkers. Now at the time I wasn't sure what it was, but apparently they'll imitate the sounds of your loved ones or other hikers, try and lure you out and do God knows what, and they told me just to ignore them. Imagine trying to do that. I vowed to myself that I would never go up to one if I'd actually seen it again, and weirdly, I'd never seen one again since. I felt a lot better knowing that whatever this thing is hadn't followed me anywhere, but God, it still haunts me to this day. Just seeing that thing was enough to fuel most of my nightmares, and I do have days where I wake up in cold sweats thinking of it. Now, when I was 8, we moved to a place that I still live to this day. The house lies at the end of a dirt road in a rural village. Surrounding the houses are fields and scattered forest patches. Our property is not very large, just the ground directly surrounding the house. In front of the house is an open grass field with some small tree patches here and there, as well as some higher and lower parts. It's not completely flat. After that, I think it's around 1 km to the field where it stops and the trees start. We must have been there a total of 3 or 4 times when I went exploring when I was younger, usually with a friend. The last time I'd been there must have been at least 4 years ago. At first glance, the trees seemed to go on for a long time, but after 50 meters, there's a dirt ridge to the left, and the right's about a 2 or 2.5 meter high ridge. Then all of a sudden, there are a few cabins as though they're misplaced with no particular pattern to their position, scattered over roughly 250 meters with a shallow pond and thick wood on the sides, and between them grass and thin bushes and some trees. The whole thing has a rectangle shape. We had crossed a ridge at some point, and the cabins really look like they're built in the 80s with flat roofs. When we first went there though, it seems odd that somebody would abandon something like this, but then we look through the windows and they're usually empty, or they might have some things covered with blankets in them. I remembered thinking it was creepy, but we found animal remains all over the land behind the ridge. We get really scared. As we went deeper into it, which was only when we got there the second time, I remembered thinking how odd it was that there were no signs of anything to mark it as someone's property. There were no roads or anything leading to it. When we got to the end of it, it felt like we're being watched. As we want to leave, I spot a tall hooded man in dark clothing walking towards us from about 80 or 100 meters away, with what looks like a rifle slung over his back. My friends and I start running away in the direction of my house, but I can see the man following us. We reach the ridge, but our view of the man is blocked by a cabin. My friend climbs over first and I follow him. We run and don't stop running until we get home again. We never told our parents or anyone else, and I don't know. I wanted to share my story, but I forgot some of the details. I haven't been back there and I've never seen the man ever after. I still have no idea what the place was or who the man was, but anyway, I'm happy that I managed to get away. A few years ago, I rented my father's second property. It's pretty far back in the woods, off a very small 2-lane dirt road. One night, I was sitting in the main room in my recliner watching videos. At this point, I only have the lights on outside on the deck. I start to get a feeling up the back of my neck, as you do when you're creeped out about something nearby or whatever. The next 10 minutes are strange. Now I have some really blurry memories of slowly walking out of the front door and down the deck steps, looking up at a giant white light floating above the cabin, and the second I looked at it, I collapsed on the bottom of the stairs and saw what seems to be a giant shock going through my body. I start crawling up the stairs and every inch of my body was being pulled super hard back away from the front door. I don't remember if the area was lit up from the light, but it sure felt like it was. The rest is a blackout, and I woke up standing at my kitchen sink with the water running hot over my head and all the lights in my house on. Now, I don't know if I'm crazy, but what did I experience? Now, this happened when I was 15, near Almaquin Park. My father and I were driving up to our cottage in the middle of winter. I was always so amazed to see the beauty of the park and Masoka, and have grown up in the beauty of the place, really enjoying it every summer. Our cottage was on a large lake, about a 30-minute drive from our nearest town. There was probably thousands of cottages on the lake. During the summer, the lake and the town's population tripled. It was cottage country, so people would always spend all summer there enjoying the lake and the warm nights around a campfire with family and friends. I spent every summer there growing up, and it still brings me fond memories of sunshine, laughter, and the sound of motorboats on the lake, but the winters were different. The people that didn't live there all year would venture back home to the city life, leaving the area mostly deserted, with cottages boarded up for the winter. There were a few people that still frequently would come up every couple of months for a few days or so, but for the most part, the lake was silent during the winters and the town was just filled with locals. The beautiful pine trees always are covered with snow, making the forest quiet. Our cottage was on a dead-end road. There were about 20 other cottages on the road, with ours being somewhat in the middle. The cottages were quite spaced out, however, with our closest neighbours being so far away to see through the trees. My dad had needed to head up to the cottage to do some painting that my mum had really been begging him to do. It was at the end of February and it was a long week, so I tagged along so he wouldn't be alone and we could spend some quality time together. It was about a 5-hour drive from our home, but turned out to be an 8-hour drive due to the heavy snow. It had gotten dark out quite early and it was around midnight as we drove through the park. It was deadly quiet and pitch black except for the headlights of the car. We finally passed through the park, with only about 30 minutes left to get to the cottage. It had stopped snowing and we were both eager to get there. As we turned onto the familiar road, I remembered my dad cursing. It hadn't been ploughed yet. This was surprising, however. It probably wouldn't be until later the next day that we would even see a snowplow. As we drove down the road, I noticed that there were some fresh tyre tracks. The Smiths must have been up here for the weekend, my dad said. All of a sudden, we drove around the bend following the tyre tracks. The headlights of the car shone on a white van that was parked on the side of the road. It was almost hidden by the vast trees that were covered with snow. "What the?" my dad mumbled as we drove past the white van. I remembered looking back through the back window and very clearly seeing 2 figures in the front seat illuminated by our retreating tail lights. I told my dad this and he shrugged, saying, "Well, maybe they're lost." I nodded but couldn't think about anything other than the fact that it's a dead-end road. Why would they want to park there? As we pull into our driveway, we started bringing our stuff in. I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. I couldn't stop thinking about the van and why it was there, with people just sitting in the dark in the middle of the night. It spooked me so much that I actually begged my dad to let me sleep upstairs with him, instead of sleeping downstairs in the room my sister and I usually shared. It had big windows with no blinds that looked out into the blackness of the forest. Now it was pretty creepy and my 15-year-old self was already scared of the dark, even without a white van there. It wasn't a big deal when my sister was there, but not tonight. As my dad got ready for bed, I sat in the living room reading a book. My dad had turned all the lights off and I was just sitting there using a small lamp next to the couch to try and get through one last chapter before bed. It was so quiet that I could almost hear my ears ringing. I'm also starting to get the feeling that I'm being watched. And the living room has large windows which has no curtains that overlook the lake. and it was black except for a light or two from cottages across the lake. I shut the lamp off and got up now. Now, that cottage was dark. The moon was also shining brightly, illuminating the snow. It was beautiful, and I walked towards the window for a better look. Movement caught my eye, and I remembered my heart dropping as I saw two figures down by the back porch, below the window, barely hidden by the surrounding trees. I dropped to the floor and crawled towards the bedroom where my dad was sleeping, my heart in my throat. I wasn't sure if they had seen me or not. I waked my dad up quickly. Now, by the time he got up and to the window, the two figures are basically gone, which I don't understand. Where I'd seen the figures, there are though two sets of footprints in the snow leading back around to the front of the cottage and back down the driveway. I beg my dad, don't go outside. He double checks the locks and turns the porch light on, hopefully scaring anyone. My dad doesn't freak out that much, but it still sets out alarm bells, and I'm worried as he headed back to bed. I remembered being very scared, and I laid there all night next to my dad, terrified to look out the window and see someone staring back at me. The next morning, my dad went outside and confirmed that there are two sets of footprints leading from the road to in behind our cottage, and then back around to the front of the cottage and back up the road. There were tyre marks that showed the vehicle turned around and then gone back up the main road. My dad guessed that they were probably looking to break in and steal his stuff, as it's the middle of the winter, and not too many people were up there, but they knew where we were. They would have seen our tyre tracks leading to our cottage, and my dad's car, well, that's parked out the front. They may have also seen the lamp I had turned on to read. My dad didn't give an answer to that, and after much back and forth, he called the non-emergency line and reported it. Apparently there'd been break-ins and stuff stolen. But again, I wonder to this day, what would they have been interested in stealing from our cabin that clearly has people inside of it? I work as a ranger. I'm not from the United States of America, but I do live in a more deserty place. I remembered one of the most scary things that I ever experienced in my life was that we'd all gone out to somewhere on one particular day and decided to rest. I'd laid down and put my hat over my head, and a gust of wind come and knocked it off me. I rolled over and put the hat on myself again and fell asleep. I wake up to a very loud thud and some screaming sounds. I bolt up like a bolt of lightning, and I look around and my friends all point. I look down and an absolutely huge cactus had come down, literally only about half a feet away from me. If I had not moved to get that hat, then that cactus probably would have killed me, or at least blinded me and did God knows what. This may sound weird too, but I actually had a really weird dream the night before. I dreamt that one of my family members who had passed away long ago had come up to my bed and kept blowing air on my face until I woke up. And when I woke up, I felt like they were there. I'm pretty convinced that they are the reason that my hat moved, and they're the reason that I'm alive today. Now this was by far the most terrifying moment of my life and always will be. My family and friends' family were going on a hiking trip to the Appalachian Mountains. We had rented cabins at a camping site and arranged certain paths to follow each day of our trip, 4 days long, that we would walk along each day. The first 3 days went great. We saw wildlife, had a good time and talked a lot, but on the 4th day, we were taking a trail that was more secluded and overgrown than others. We were walking for about 30 minutes when I was hit with an overwhelming feeling of uneasiness. The feeling just stayed there no matter how hard I tried to beat it back. Then, everyone else on the hike denies this, but I start hearing singing, in a language I've never heard before. I felt like the singing could be described as the myth of sirens, sweet and enchanting, yet the music also invokes a feeling of fear which actually goes to my bones. Everybody else seems completely oblivious. I tried telling my dad that something was wrong, but he just told me that I was probably tired and we would stop soon. So about 5 minutes later, and the singing just keeps getting louder and my heart keeps racing. We had to stop and rest and eat something as well. I wish with all my heart that we didn't stop. About 2 minutes into our resting, the singing gets progressively louder and my nerves are not settled at all. Then, everything goes silent. Everyone in the group of about 12 people suddenly turns to the trees to our left, and a tall figure in a black cloak, which is barely visible between the trees, appears. It's a woman, much shorter than normal people are, with pure white hair flowing out of the hood. Her head is down, but her face is still slightly visible. All I can make out is that her skin is pale yellow like old paper as we watch, and she stalks closer to the group, finally stopping at the edge of the trees. She looks up and I swear to God I will never forget her face. Her eyes are completely white with no pupil or iris, and she has a thin pointed nose and a mouth with thin lips which are stained red. I don't know why. She stares at us for a while and then smiles with no teeth. She begins to talk. She had a horrible scratchy high-pitched talk in voice and said, "Leave this place." I blink and she's gone and everybody's silent. This is my first time experiencing anything like this and my first time telling what had happened to me with anybody but the ones there. I don't know what to say about what had happened. Now this was by far the most terrifying moment of my life and always will be. My family and friends' family were going on a hiking trip to the Appalachian Mountains. We had rented cabins at a camping site and arranged certain paths to follow each day of our trip, 4 days long, that we would walk along each day. The first 3 days went great. We saw wildlife, had a good time and talked a lot, but on the 4th day, we were taking a trail that was more secluded and overgrown than others. We were walking for about 30 minutes when I was hit with an overwhelming feeling of uneasiness. The feeling just stayed there no matter how hard I tried to beat it back. Then, everyone else on the hike denies this, but I start hearing singing in a language I've never heard before. I felt like the singing could be described as the myth of sirens, sweet and enchanting, yet the music also invokes a feeling of fear which actually goes to my bones. Everybody else seems completely oblivious. I tried telling my dad that something was wrong, but he just told me that I was probably tired and we would stop soon. So about 5 minutes later, and the singing just keeps getting louder and my heart keeps racing. We had to stop and rest and eat something as well. I wish with all my heart that we didn't stop. About 2 minutes into our resting, the singing gets progressively louder and my nerves are not settled at all. Then, everything goes silent. Everyone in the group of about 12 people suddenly turns to the trees to our left, and a tall figure in a black cloak, which is barely visible between the trees, appears. It's a woman, much shorter than normal people are, with pure white hair flowing out of the hood. Her head is down, but her face is still slightly visible. All I can make out is that her skin is pale yellow like old paper as we watch, and she stalks closer to the group, finally stopping at the edge of the trees. She looks up and I swear to God I will never forget her face. Her eyes are completely white with no pupil or iris, and she has a thin pointed nose and a mouth with thin lips which are stained red. I don't know why. She stares at us for a while and then smiles with no teeth. She begins to talk. She had a horrible scratchy high-pitched talk in voice and said, "Leave this place." I blink and she's gone and everybody's silent. This is my first time experiencing anything like this and my first time telling what had happened to me with anybody but the ones there. I don't know what to say about what had happened. Now in the fall of 1998, I went to Somerset, Vermont to go camping along the Somerset River. A forest road runs up to an airfield with 3 dispersed campsites. It was first come first serve, and in the summertime it would be packed with kids partying and living their best lives. Still, my girlfriend and I planned this trip in the fall because the fall leaves in Vermont are something special, and we knew the campground would be completely empty pretty much in the middle of the work week during the off season. I set up our tent and we walk around the woods, down the river, just enjoying the season's natural beauty. We lay in the tent, talking as the sun went down, and drifted off to sleep. Sometime in the night though, I awoken to the sound of 2 voices outside the tent. It sounded like 2 men whispering to each other, but it wasn't in English. I couldn't distinguish what they were saying, but distinctly heard 2 male voices. Suddenly, there was a single low whistle from off in the distance, and then I heard one of the men make a click sound in acknowledgement. Everything was quiet after that. I waited until sunrise and went outside of the tent and looked around. I didn't see anyone. My heart was pounding in my chest and I was wide awake. I waked my girlfriend up and we left. I still wonder where those guys came from and why they were whistling and clicking to communicate. The Somerset campground is far off the beaten path and I didn't hear or see any other vehicle. Rural Vermont has a lot of strange legends and folklores. Years after this happened, I heard about the Bennington Triangle and the disappearances of people in the 1950s. Now I left the state and joined the army a few months later. I've only ever been back to Vermont a few times since that, but I never camped there again. Now, today I'd like to share my story that happened quite a number of years ago, though the feelings have never really left me. I'm somebody who spent a lot of time working out in nature. I was a park ranger, so I'd always done things outside. I mean, not just while I was at work, but for other reasons too. I remembered I had some friends that were really begging me to go out to the desert with them. I had this best friend called John, and he was the one who was the most up for it. He kept on telling me about all of these crazy experiences that he had out in this particular area of the desert. He said that he would see these people, well, he kind of describes them as some kind of beings or something, and I don't know, it was linked to UFOs and things, and I'm actually sure that I saw a UFO once. I was on top of one of our towers that you use for lookouts, and I saw a light in the sky that almost appeared red then purple, then suddenly split off in 4 different directions with different sections of it going the different ways. So yeah, I was kind of up for this. I was a little skeptical. I mean, even though I'd seen a UFO, I didn't really trust my eyes, and being out there and being so bored at times, I guess your mind plays tricks on you. But this friend John kept on and on going on about it, and eventually I decided to agree. He said it was kind of like a spiritual place that you could go to, and pretty much you'd be able to talk through all of your problems with these beings and that everything would be okay. Now don't ask me why I actually agreed to do this. I don't know, I guess I wasn't thinking at the time. I'm not someone who really gives into peer pressure too. He'd actually been going on about this for ages and I don't know, I felt bad for always saying no, so we set out on one particular day. We parked up and made sure that we have all of our water with us and we set off. Now we had some camping gear with us, so we're going to be okay as long as the water didn't run too low. We decided that we'd never go far from where we parked, so that way we can always go back and get more supplies if we really need them. So with that, off we went. Now the first area that we're going in, you can see lots of different tire tracks, and apparently according to John this wasn't good because it meant other people would be around, but he told me not to worry too much about this. The area that we're in is actually pretty nice. We're kind of flanked by hills and there's kind of like a mountainy part up ahead of us. It looks really cool though, to be honest. And we continue on our hike. Now John's actually a really good friend and He's genuinely one of the only people that actually understands me and is very similar with me in life. We have had a few arguments, but just over silly things, and I guess this guy was more of a brother than my actual brother to me at times. Now that meant we would talk about everything. Often it was about relationships and other things that had went wrong in our lives before, and the more we spoke, I guess the more that we realised we're similar. And again, I didn't actually know just how similar we were. I mean, heck, it was pretty unbelievable, but I won't share too many details here about that, just because it kind of goes into some of the darkness that we both seem to experience somehow at the same time, almost living opposite lives, but parallel emotionally. So we talk through everything, and he says that we're not too far from where we need to get to, and that's when we encounter the first group of people. Now, they do seem a little bit weird at first. John also seems a little bit hesitant, but he ends up going up to them and starts talking. It turns out that they're here for the same reason, and although they seem a little bit weird, we decide to try and talk to them. I wasn't sure if one of them was on something, but he just seemed too talkative. They tell us that they've got something they want us to drink, and apparently they made some nice bush tea for us. Who was I to say no, and I end up drinking it. We exchange a couple of snacks, and it was actually a really good time. Now, we'd been with these guys for quite a while and eventually decide that it's time to leave them and go on. Now, we continue on our way, and you can actually see that the path is marked by different rocks that people have put there, so we know that we're not going anywhere too dangerous or anything. My friend John constantly reminds me to drink lots of water, and I keep doing so. I seem to get a headache now, which I really can't fend off for some reason. I have pretty sensitive eyes though. I can't even look at the ground when it's bright without sunglasses, without my eyes being strained. I also get this weird thing where I kind of see like flashy lights or something, but I know what it is. It's not a migraine, but I guess it's just my eyes going weird. Sometimes I'll see a strange bright colour too, but I guess that doesn't matter too much. We come up to one part of the hike where there's quite a big drop on the left hand side of us. If we're going to fall now, we're going to be in trouble, so we really try our best to avoid this. My friend then says that we haven't got too much further to go before we get to the people, and that's when we encounter some rangers. That's really odd, I think. There shouldn't be any rangers up here whatsoever. I don't know what they're doing, and we just say hi and don't really think much of it and just keep going. They seem a little odd, but I wasn't paying too much attention. That's when my buddy John says, "Did you notice something?" I say, "No, what's that?" He says, "Well, those guys looked almost exactly the same as each other, and I don't know, something just felt really off about them. I didn't really notice it, but trying to think of it, it almost felt like they didn't have much of a facial expression, almost like they were wearing a rubber mask, but I can't really tell." They eventually go off a little bit further, and we don't think too much of it as they slowly go out of sight. I then explained that I've heard about some twins who become park rangers in an area not far from where I was working at the time, and that, yeah, it's just basically a normal thing that you will get stuff like this. You know, you get families who are raised in the outdoors like me, and that's what the families want to do, jobs like ours. And my buddy John tells me not to worry too much and makes a joke out of it. And I tell him, "Hey, I'm not the one worried here," and we press on. Now my friend keeps on talking to me about this thing and how great it's going to be, and eventually we set up the tents. We do this, and I keep on slamming my water. One thing that's weird is that I haven't really had the urge to urinate too much yet. Usually I'll be going like every 10 seconds almost, but I don't really feel the urge to. I guess it was hot, but the weird thing is it's not really too hot now. There's kind of an overcast in the clouds, and it means that it's not really warm, it's actually a little bit cold. But John says, "Hey, come on man, we've got to go up to this before sundown, because this hill is where you're going to see it." Now I was either convinced that he was just off his head, or there were actually aliens here. We're nowhere near Roswell, so it wasn't anything like that, but I don't know. I'd given him the benefit of the doubt. Talking to this friend though was honestly like a therapy in itself. It was almost like the ideas that I had, my friend could give me, and the ideas that he had, he could give me, and it would kind of complete each other. Not in a weird way, but just kind of like a nice bond and friendship. So yeah, it's getting a little bit dark, and I keep telling my buddy that we have to remember where the tent is because we're not going to see it. My friend doesn't take much notice of me and keeps on going. Now, he says that he's going to continue on, but I say that I feel like I need to stop for a bit. I don't know why, but suddenly the headache becomes absolutely overwhelming. Now, my friend continues on and I just let him go. Now, I feel extremely tired suddenly and I don't want to sleep, but you know when you try and lay on your side and not sleep, you know what happens? Yeah, you end up sleeping. Now, that was exactly what happened to me. I managed to wake myself up a couple of times, but I kind of drift off again. It's almost like I've got an alarm clock in my head, but I permanently had it on snooze and I wake up again. When I woke up, I felt like I'd slept for ages and almost like I'd had the best night's sleep of my life, but everything felt different now. I get up and look at the sky, and it's kind of got like an orange hue to it, and I continue on the trail and try and find where my friend is. For some reason when I wake up, I suddenly feel much more peaceful. I wasn't concerned about finding my friend and I presumed that he just left me there to sleep and went back to the tent, so I decided to go on myself. I drank quite a lot of water again and I was actually running out in my first tank, which is surprising. Again, no urge to urinate, which I think is really weird, but I keep going. Now as I'm walking, I can hear a strange humming. It was almost like a kind of energy is the best way I can describe it. I wasn't entirely sure what it was, but I knew I should keep going and I thought maybe, just maybe, this is what John was telling me about. And I thought in the back of my head, maybe this is him up here making those sounds. I decided to continue and I make it a bit further now. The going's actually quite tough here and the terrain's quite rocky now. I'm not too happy about this because I keep on whacking my shins when I'm trying to go up this thing. And also I keep getting little branches and things that are cutting up my ankles. But for some reason I'm not too bothered by this, and that's weird too because usually I'm really worried. As I get higher and higher up, I realise something weird now. I seem to be talking to myself in my head kind of far too much. It's quite weird. It goes from very positive to suddenly very negative, and it keeps on switching between the two. And that's when I realise it. Something's different about the sky. The colours seem off and the sky just seems far too bright. Now, I think this is really bizarre, but nothing too much to worry about. Again, I wasn't really thinking straight at this time. Now, I end up just walking and walking and I don't necessarily have a destination in mind. I don't know how far I was gone for, but I see my buddy up ahead of me. At least I think it's John. I say, John, John, and he keeps on walking around the corner. I think, God, you're such an idiot. My foot was starting to hurt now and I can't be bothered to walk quicker, but I practically force myself to power up towards him. I eventually make it there and I realise something strange. He's just vanished. I try and figure out where that he's actually gone to, and I walk up the hill and look over it, and there he is again. John, John, I scream out, but he doesn't listen. What's weird is that he just keeps on and on walking, but he seems to be far too far away from me. Even if he sprinted down this hill, he shouldn't have been able to get this far, and I suddenly realise that I can't see him any longer. I think this is odd, and I look around, and suddenly I've realised that there's a few more people around. There's quite a lot up on a ridge and they're all waving at me trying to get me to come over to them. I can see that they brought some kind of dirt bike with them and I put my hand on it, but I decide to leave it because it's theirs. I think that this is a group that we've seen earlier, so I start to go further and further. And my God, do I have a bad migraine or something because my eyes are going a bit funny. I'm kind of seeing the weird colours again, but my vision's definitely a bit off now. I try not to think too much of it, and I reach down and realise that there's all water over my hand. I quickly start slapping around trying to figure out where the source of it's from, and notice how cold my hand is, when I realise that suddenly my hand isn't wet and it's in my head. I'm not aware that something's off at this point, and I just thought it was lucky that there's no water here. I then open up my bag and start drinking, and I realise that the heavens have opened up now. There's rain falling all around me, and it feels quite nice to be out of the desert sun. Now, I eventually make it up to the hill where all the people are waving, and it seems like they're being very friendly to me, saying good things and encouraging me. I stop to get a bit of breath and rest my legs for a few moments, and I say, "Hey guys, wait for me, I won't be long." And that's when I realise that my vision's gone a bit weird. It almost feels like I'm going backwards now, but I'm not. I take a few deep breaths and I become very, very conscious of my breathing and the rain around me. This calms me a lot, and I think the deep breathing did me some good. And I'll continue on and make sure that I can see my new friends at the top of the hill. There seems to be less and less of them now, and I eventually make it all the way up there. Now when I get to the very top, suddenly something changes. It's almost like they've all just appeared around me suddenly, but as I look at them, their faces seem off, and I suddenly notice that there's something very inhuman about them. Now, their faces look much more scary, and suddenly they morph into some kind of dark figures which tower over me. I mean, it starts off with about my height until they're about 2 or 3 times taller, and suddenly they surround me. But for whatever reason, I don't feel afraid and I don't feel scared of anything. I kind of notice that they're around me, and because I can't see now, I kind of lose my balance and fall over for a second. When I fall over, I'm staring back up at the sky now. I don't feel any pain or anything, but I can see lightning bolts all around me, and the rain picks up a lot more. I wiped my eyes trying to figure out what was happening when I eventually managed to get myself up off the ground again. I'm looking around and the figures are gone. I think, my god, did I encounter them? Was that it? What did I get out of this? Did I learn anything? Did I see anything? Are they actually there? And I think that this can't necessarily be anything that I actually believe's there. And I decide that I should keep looking for John. It suddenly clicks again. Now, that's when I start to get a bit scared. I have a sudden feeling of panic, and the more that I panic, the worse I feel, and I start picking up the pace more and more. And I start to see these beings again. These are different from the ones that I've seen earlier, and they seem a lot more malicious and malevolent. The further I go, the closer they seem to come towards me. It gets to a point where I honestly feel like there's an army of them behind me, and I don't dare look around. I'm not sure how long this went on for with this weird feeling of being followed, but my god, it must have been a long time. And I can tell you that I did not feel good during 1 second of it. I was trying to loop my way back round to where the tent should be, but to be honest, I had no idea of where I was going. Now, as you can imagine, this is incredibly dangerous out in the desert, especially if you're on your own, but I wasn't thinking of that. I remember eventually I was able to stop and turn around, and they're gone again. I look up in the sky for UFOs, and the stars seem to be too bright, and there seems to be too many of them. I wipe my eyes and it's rain again. I realise something's definitely off now. I start trying to hit my head, not hard, just enough to make sure I'm awake, but yes, I am. Now suddenly things seem to go straight back to normal. The raining stopped now, which I'm pretty happy about, and I continue now, but I'm no longer on the path. I'm going towards some kind of darker area now, where the sun seems to be far from me. I get here and I feel like I'm on a barren wasteland, and I call out for John. All I'm met with is echoes, and I'm convinced that he's back in the tent. I say, John, you better be in that tent and I better find you there. And I start trying to go downhill now, and that's when I fall. I don't know how it happened, but I can only imagine that my foot got snagged on a rock, and I actually fall quite a bit down, tumbling. I fall asleep again, and now I wake up and John is prodding me. At least I think it's John. I say, John, what are you doing? Confused as to who it is. And that's when I see it. One of the dark beings has found me, and there's a sea of stars behind him, and he takes me by my hand and lifts me up. Now, as he's lifting me up, I realise that I'm in some kind of different area again to where I thought I was. For some reason, this being seems a lot more friendly than the others, and seems to be guiding me away from wherever I was before. I look back and I can see the army of the others once again, and this thing just demands without saying anything that I look forward, and that's exactly what I do. Now, I keep going down pretty treacherous terrain, but this thing seems to be really helping me get through. Now, as weird as it sounds, I was pretty much having a full-on conversation with this thing in my head. It spoke in almost like a hushed tone, but kind of with more reverberation. It was like every time that it spoke, I would hear things and feel it through my body. I was asking where we were going and it said to safety, and I kept asking what's happening and it kept saying don't worry, don't worry. Now I'm not sure when it happened, but this being, whatever it is, left me, and it was up to me to continue the rest of the journey. I look around and it's much further away now, pointing, trying to usher me to go forwards, and I follow it. I'm now walking pretty close to some kind of crevasse or something. Almost like a very, very small Grand Canyon's probably the best way that I can describe it, but maybe not grand because of how small it is. Again, I'm going on a pretty sheer rock face, and how I don't fall at this point is beyond me. I know that my fall was definitely real though because of the blood on my white socks. Now, it doesn't take too much longer, and a miracle happens. I can see the tent, and it's where it should be, and I can see the silhouette of something or someone in it. Is it my friend? What is it? I think to myself. Now, I'm pretty much glued to the spot, and I realise that I've been asking myself this over and over again in my head for God knows how long, until eventually I decide that I've got to will myself forward, and it's almost like I've got to will one foot ahead of the other. I eventually make it there and open the tent, and John's there. I say, John, what are you doing? He says, hi, you're back. I was getting worried about you. I say, what do you mean? He said, I thought you said you were going to come back soon and we're going to take a leak. I say, I didn't say that. You were just going up the hill. And he looks at me very confused. I then tell him about the beings, and he tells me that he saw some too, but he wasn't sure what to think of it, because he was quite tired and thought it was a dream. He then tells me that he thinks what he saw was me, and called out, but I didn't reply, so he told me to meet me back at the tent, and he fell asleep. I decided not to tell him exactly what I'd seen, and I ended up crashing out. Now, I woke up again the next morning, and my God did I feel terrible. My body felt like absolute crud, and I decided the best thing to do is slam lots of water. I feel a lot better, and suddenly my heart starts pounding. Suddenly, all of my senses come flooding back to me, and the fear, this terrible fear of realising what had happened the night before, comes back to me. I let out a loud gasp and grab my friend John, who is still sleeping. I shake him awake, and it looks like he's just seen a ghost because of the way that I've awoken him. I then explain everything that happened to him, and that's when it hits us. Something was definitely off last night. I explain my story, and he then tells me his, and we weirdly both describe the beings as being almost exactly the same as each other, and we have this horrible feeling of dread, like something's really off. My friend John now realises that he definitely didn't understand what actually happened to me, and that it's weird because we have different stories of how we lost each other. We decide that we need to go back and make sure that we stay nice and hydrated because we're going to move quick, and we quickly pack up the things. Now, I can't describe to you the feeling of dread that I had when I packed up everything and I start heading back with John. I was absolutely convinced that it was paramount that we were about to be followed by those beings. Now, I have to tell you, in this moment, it was so real. What I'd seen and experienced is truly like nothing else I've ever seen on Earth before. And I don't know, in the moment I was kind of in this trance, so I just guess I went along with it. I remembered every time that I'd see a bush or tree that was darker than the rest, I almost had a mini heart attack. But I kept going. I didn't have a choice. The weird thing is too that the landscape all looked different from the way we'd come in. Luckily though, John knew the way, and eventually we make it back to the rocks which had been put there by others to mark the way. Now, neither of us say anything. We're both very paranoid and constantly looking around, trying to see if there's anything there or any kind of explanation for what we'd just seen. We start talking a bit, and that's the more scared we get, the more we try and match up what had happened. Now, eventually we do make it back, and my god, getting back to being inside a vehicle was probably the best feeling in the world. I was actually so shaken up that I couldn't drive though, and I just had to lock the doors and just lay in the seat for a while, trying to think of what had happened. Had we been drugged? My buddy John then says that he thinks that we were probably drugged and that those guys probably spiked us with something that we ate or drank. He said it sounded like a weird drug that he had heard about before that can make you hallucinate, and apparently the plant for it and seeds are actually quite common in nature, and he thinks they probably got it from here and thought it'd be funny to do it and not tell us. I was convinced of the same thing because the whole thing just felt so weird. God, how could they be so evil to us? I mean, we literally could have died. We could have ended up like those hikers who went out into the wilderness and just disappeared. What really worried me is the fact that we got separated out here, completely out of our minds, both of us. Now, anything could have happened to me. I checked for bruises and I didn't have a headache or anything, but I could have easily fell, hit my head and got brain bleeding or something. I don't know, it's just too easy to happen out here. But the thing that neither of us understand is, how do we get back? We both agree that we're probably miles away from each other at some point, because at the very least we should have heard each other screaming out, but we didn't hear a thing. And the rest of the drive back was a pretty weird one. This is when the both of us discovered that we had also seen the rain before, but the area around us didn't seem to be too wet. I mean, yeah, it is a desert, so it could have just evaporated, but I don't know. It just felt a little bit different somehow. And eventually we get back. Now we make it to John's mum's house, and John's mum says, "God, you guys must have seen it. Surely you guys seen it, tell me you did. It was right where you guys were staying." We look at each other very concerned. Was this the first that the beings had been actually reported or what? And his mum then says, "Did you see the UFO? I saw it. So many of our neighbours saw it." I say, "What do you mean?" Getting a little bit angry. She says, "The UFO, so many of us saw it. Those weird flashing lights in the sky. It was almost like a big triangle with red glowing orbs under it. It went over to roughly where you guys were staying in the desert. Then a few more appeared, and it was there in the same place for about a good half an hour." My heart drops now. Apparently it was accompanied by a quick storm, and suddenly they just shot off, never to be seen again that night. Apparently hundreds of people had all seen the same thing, and the timeline pretty much matched up to when we got over there. Now, me and John looked at each other, and we went off into his room and sat down for a while. We made some tea, and just kind of stared at each other, not knowing what to say. Now, it's been quite a while since this experience, and I don't know, I could have very easily been drugged with my friend, but the fact that a lot of what we had seen matched up with each other, and the other fact that so many people had seen something in the sky that night exactly where we are, it just seems a little bit weird. It just doesn't feel right. I don't know. Now my brother's 2 years older than me, and we've probably spent 10,000 hours and then some in the woods together, whether it was building forts, BMX tracks, to LARPing and hunting. We travelled across the US exploring caves, canyons, cliff diving, mountain biking, camping, hunting whitetail, mule deer, wild boar, etc. Now since 2016, when we actually got time off to do it all, that's when most of that took place. I feel like adding this is important because there's genuinely nothing I wouldn't do or fear when I have him by my side, but this time it's different. We both felt it. We had our fair share of adventures and stories of all sorts, but this one has felt like a lingering stain on my memory. We're both mid-20-ish, and it was 2019, and this was probably my 5th time hunting the area, and the first time I brought my brother along. It's a large forest area of public land that has a few country roads which are basically 2 tracks that stretch miles throughout the area. We make the trip up in my truck with our tents, 3 in total. 1 for each of us and another to change in and keep our gear in. Without making this long-winded, we set up a couple of miles from the truck, which we drove for quite a few miles through the trails because we're basically in the middle of nowhere. And basically the nearest road is probably about 10 or more miles away. We arrived in the night, set up camp and quickly fell asleep after a long trip. We then spent the next day scouting / tracking, then made back to camp for the night. We cooked and then ate, had some beers and just talk. The night was still early, but we had a long day and decided to head off for the night. Everything up until this point is normal. I was suddenly awoke to something smacking my tent and hearing my brother's voice call my name. By the way he said it, I know something's off. I call back to him and he immediately unzips my tent and made his way inside. I can tell that he's disturbed when I ask him what's wrong, and immediately he grabs my shoulder and tells me to shush. The sun wasn't up yet, so I think it was around 4:30 or 5 AM-ish. We sat in my tent and what we heard still confuses me to this day. I can only describe it as wow sounds, different tones of extremely loud noise that I could feel throughout my entire body. It would come and go, but it would only be there for a few seconds and have silence again. It would vary from pitch and squeaked and squealed, and it was almost like infrasound at times with a shaking reverb. I mean literally, the ground was shaking a bit. I regrettably didn't think to grab my phone or record anything that was going on because I was hearing what didn't seem to be real and I was kind of awestruck. The sound went on until daylight starts to break. I believe it was about an hour, but I'm not really sure. Neither of us spoke, and at the time I felt like I could feel the energy around me, almost like my body was covered in white noise, if that makes any sense. It wasn't even minutes after the sound stopped, it started to rain, and one of the craziest thunderstorms while I was camping happened there. The forecast didn't predict or account for any rain, which is weird. All the stakes from the tent for our gear was incompletely but ripped out from both of our tents. Those things were dove into the ground and truly shouldn't have been able to come out, but they did. My brother dismisses it and won't even talk about it, saying that it was just machinery being dragged, but we both had the same feeling of dread, and it just seems so odd that this all happened in the middle of the night and was so far away from anything that should have been able to make it.